My name's Kit Rigby, and I've been speaking to locals of Bedminster to hear what they had to say about shop closure, the word gentrification, and Lower Clifton. Welcome to Bubble One's look at little communities. This week, Bedminster in Bristol. Originally a town in Somerset, now Bedminster is an area of Bristol with its history unrecognisable, both because of the coal rush population increase around the early 18th century and the extensive destruction caused during the Second World War. This eclectic community can be found hosting weekly markets and the prolific hot air balloon productions. Its North Street is a close second to Gloucester Road for independent shopping, and the housing market is only going to keep climbing. So where was this Bedminster when I arrived by Asda on East Street? From the moment I stepped foot on East Street, one thing was clear. A lot of shops had closed, permanently it seemed. But why? Most locals were keen to explain what had gone wrong for Bedminster. My initial task was to go to Bedminster and scout out the area. I wanted to see if any stories jumped out at me, or if any locals had some initial ideas. I got chatting to a few, visited a couple of shops and pubs. Nothing really jumped out at me until one elderly florist told me about what the area was like before COVID and in the years before and how much it had changed.
You couldn't walk up here.
Was it so bad?
For so many people here. This was a real thriving area, mate. But when Wilson's went, so did Bedminster. All this used to be full. All these shops used to be full.
He told me about Will's Cigarette Company and its closure 15 odd years ago, which had slowly added to the deterioration of Bedminster. Asda had been the offices for the cigarette company, and the streets were packed because of this.
They down there took the hit from the thieves.
Oh, right. So that's all.
Shoplifters, mate. 60 odd grand they lost last year.
Pleased with my initial scouting of Bedminster, I headed back to see what I could produce. What caught my attention the most was the difference between North Street and East Street and the way that people described both of them. So I went back with the intent of finding out more about the term Lower Clifton, which I'd come so familiar with over that day, and why East Street was considered such a different area. Back in Bedminster, I was met with a much more sombre tone, people warning me not to come back looking for news stories at night. I only wanted to understand why this area was so much more different from North Street, and what had changed over the last years to turn it to such. After a couple of conversations in East Street, I decided to head over to North Street, this so-called area known as Lower Clifton. I knew that the housing market was on the rise in Bedminster as a whole, so I wondered why this was so different from East Street.
Southfield's like, back in the day you could buy a house there for pence, and it's flipped, and now it's like, they call it what, Lower Clifton?
Lower Clifton, yeah, some other guys have just said that to us.
Yeah, so it's now Lower Clifton. So yeah, the area's changed for the better, I guess. I'm sure it's bringing money into the area. Nice. Obviously with money coming in and like that being injected, then I suppose the level of the shops around have to raise, so the quality therefore raises, so yeah.
So it's looking good. And you would, we heard that there'd been some burglaries and things, there's been a bit of high street. It was nice to hear the positive outlook for a change. Perhaps it was my fault for previously focusing on the negative, but here I was being told about the up-and-coming housing being produced, commercial success within individual businesses, and just the overall inject of money, most staying away from the word gentrification.
I met with a real estate agent on the corner of East Street and North Street, and he explained to me about BS3 as a whole for the housing market, saying it's a really popular area to live.
Oh, as a whole in BS3, it doesn't matter where you are.
Okay.
Like I say, whether you're here or whether you're way out in the back of BS3, it's still a super convenient place to live.
Yeah, of course.
None of it is not desirable.
No.
But there are obviously more expensive areas than others, but none of it's not desirable, I would say.
He told me about the planning going on around East Street and the negative response it's received.
Hundreds of thousands of pounds are being spent on bringing back to life East Street in Bedminster.
A shopping arcade.
Yeah, I think I spoke to
All of that is just literally had planning for a cinema.
Oh,
bowling
so that's
alley,
going to be bought.
It's a big modern tower block behind, so that's been frowned upon. I think that needs development, maybe not housing so much, but it needs money down there in terms of things for people to do. Because then and it is coming back down. You know, you see the shops cropping up. You know, an independent cycle shop's just popped up down there. You know, the nice coffee shop on the corner, Sweven down on the little roundabout down there. There's loads of independent.
I think it's clear that Bedminster isn't a hidden district, but I do believe it's overlooked. COVID has undoubtedly had its effect, and perhaps worse than other areas within Bristol. All these aspects considered, it's in dire need of fresh life. And by the sounds of it, Bristol City's giving it just that. Bedminster is an area of Bristol where you can see both the past and the future. The older locals remember what it was and sit contently in that memory, whilst the modern young look at the potential and see its rise. I enjoyed my exploring of the area and the residents, and although warned of its less glamorous side, I only saw the faces behind pints at the pub, street conversations and quick snippets whilst working. I left Bedminster surprised at my overall emotion, as first impressions were of a run-down, unpopular area. So I left happy with local interactions and with a fondness for its community. We'd like to make a huge thank you to everyone that listened to this show of Little Communities. We looked at Bedminster and Bristol this week. And I've been your host, Kit Rigby. Thank you and see you soon.